To delve into one of the most harrowing, sinister, and deeply disturbing chapters in the history of true crime, we must travel to the city of Milwaukee, in the state of Wisconsin. An urban setting that harbored in absolute secrecy the activities of a true human predator whose monstrosity surpassed the limits of the most twisted imagination. Imagine the following sequence. You are walking calmly down the street and a tall, blond man with blue eyes approaches you and very politely offers you $100 in exchange for posing for some artistic photographs. He is someone who seems very calm, composed, speaks with education and respect, and transmits a deep sense of trust and a strange charisma that draws you in, so you decide to accept and go up to his apartment. However, as soon as you cross the front door, the first thing that hits your nostrils is a horrific and nauseating smell, an intense fragrance of absolute rot, as if someone had left a freezer full of food accumulated for weeks to spoil. As you observe the surroundings in bewilderment, your gaze stops in a corner where an object completely out of place in a residential home rests, a huge blue industrial drum. Although your internal alarms go off, the man's soft-spoken tone continues to wrap around you, and he invites you to the bedroom. Upon entering, you see the walls decorated with posters of naked men and a television where the movie The Exorcist III is playing, right in one of the most terrifying scenes in cinema history. It is in that precise moment of distraction when the subject, taking advantage of your lapse in attention, puts metal handcuffs on one of your wrists, pulls out a huge butcher knife, rests his head directly on your chest to listen to your heartbeat, and whispers a chilling phrase into your ear. "Tonight, I am going to eat your heart." This is not a work of fiction or a cinematic exaggeration. It is the faithful and rigorously documented reconstruction of the life of Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, universally known under the infamous pseudonyms of the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, an individual whose real crimes and sexual perversion shook the foundations of society. The spiral of darkness of this killer began officially on May 21, 1960, the date he was born into a family that, at first glance, did not fit the classic pattern of broken or violent homes that tend to mold serial killers. His father, Lionel Herbert Dahmer, was a respected chemistry student at Marquette University and a later scientific researcher, a cultured man who was chronically absent due to the high demands of his profession and graduate studies. His mother, Joyce Annette Flint, suffered from deep psychological instability and severe postpartum depression that disconnected her emotionally from the baby, showing absolute apathy and unconscious rejection when little Jeffrey cried or sought comfort. The domestic atmosphere was impregnated with an asphyxiating tension due to bitter marital arguments that included pushing and constant shouting, while Joyce developed extreme hypochondria that brought her to the brink of collapse, forcing her to spend entire days confined to bed consuming massive doses of sedatives, laxatives, and tranquilizers like Equal, even attempting to take her own life on one occasion. Lionel would write many years later a book titled A Father's Story, where he would attempt to understand his role and what went wrong in his son's life. A medical event that occurred shortly before Jeffrey turned 4 marked an apparent turning point in the child's behavior. He underwent double hernia surgery in his groin. The surgery went well in medical terms, but upon waking up sore and disoriented, Jeffrey interpreted in an infantile way, with his child's mind, that the doctors had permanently severed or harmed his genitals. Many years later, knowing what his son had become, Lionel would mentally return to that exact moment, wondering if the mix of pain, fear, and that erroneous infantile interpretation planted the first seed of his mental disconnection and his subsequent obsession with controlling the male body. From that moment on, the energetic and cheerful infant transformed into a withdrawn being, extremely quiet and disconnected from the world around him, a shyness that worsened after the birth of his younger brother, David, in 1966, at which point he felt that whatever little affection his parents had was vanishing completely. Shortly after, Lionel discovered the remains of a dead animal under the house and, upon removing them, noticed that his son observed the bone structures with unusual fascination, taking them in his hands without any fear and calling them affectionately his fiddlesticks. Wrongly believing that it was genuine scientific curiosity about biology, his father encouraged this behavior by teaching him the basic foundations of taxidermy and going out together to local roads to collect roadkill to dissect in a small wooden shack located in the forest on the property. It was the only quality time they spent together, but Jeffrey would apply those technical and chemical skills years later with chilling precision to human anatomies. Despite this obsession and the macabre incident in 1975 where he decapitated a dog's carcass to nail its body to a tree and impale the skull on a wooden stake, it is fundamental to note that there are no official records that Jeffrey tortured or sacrificed live animals in his childhood, which breaks the classic triad of early psychopathy and proves his fixation was on the stillness of dead bodies. Upon reaching adolescence and studying at Revere High School, Dahmer began to deal with the discovery of his own homosexuality in the highly stigmatized and conservative environment of the 70s, learning to repress his inclinations in public while in the secrecy of his mind his desires were intertwined with fantasies of domination, absolute submission, and the dissection of perfect male torsos. To anesthetize the fear and shame his own thoughts provoked, he took refuge starting at age 14 in severe alcoholism, attending morning classes with bottles of whiskey or gin hidden in his jacket, justifying it to his classmates by saying that the liquor was simply his medicine to get through the day. At age 17, he almost committed his first violent attack by becoming obsessed with a young man who used to jog near his house. Jeffrey hid behind some bushes armed with a baseball bat, waiting for the ideal moment to knock him out and be able to touch him at will, but by fate's design, the runner never passed by that day due to a route change. Desperate to fit in or get attention at school, he adopted the role of class clown, simulating fake epileptic seizures, guttural noises, and cerebral palsy in the hallways, which gave rise to a cruel mockery among his classmates known as doing a Dahmer. Although a group of students led by the future cartoonist John Durf integrated him superficially by creating a satirical fan club and introducing him into high school yearbook photos for clubs he did not belong to, the bond dissolved completely when Durf witnessed how Dahmer was capable of consuming 6 beers in a row in 15 minutes without staggering or changing his facial expression, evidencing that the young man did not drink for fun, but to flee from an immense darkness that threatened to devour him. In 1978, the family ecosystem collapsed abruptly. After discovering Joyce's infidelity, Lionel requested a divorce and left the house to live in a nearby motel. Weeks before Jeffrey's high school graduation, Joyce packed all her belongings into trucks and moved secretly to the town of Fresno, California, taking her second son, David, with her, leaving Jeffrey, who had just turned 17 and a half, in total and absolute abandonment in the immense empty house in Bath, Ohio, without money or sufficient food. Extreme isolation catalyzed the first fatal crime on the afternoon of June 18, 1978, when Dahmer was driving his car and spotted on the side of the road Stephen Hicks, a 19-year-old hitchhiker who was trying to get to a rock concert at Nelson Ledges State Park. Attracted by his physique, Jeffrey convinced him to enter his house with the promise of drinking some beers and listening to music. After several hours of company, the moment Hicks manifested his firm intention to leave to continue his trip, Dahmer suffered a panic attack at the prospect of being left alone again in the emptiness of the house, so he approached the young man from behind and struck a brutal blow to his skull with a heavy iron dumbbell for exercising, proceeding immediately to strangle him with a metal bar for several minutes until he stopped breathing. Subsequently, he committed acts of necrophilia with the corpse on the carpet before moving it to the basement, where he meticulously dismembered the body using the taxidermy tools his father had given him, kept the organic tissues in plastic bags that he temporarily buried in the garden and, months later, dug up the bones to clean them with acid, crushed the bone structure with a mallet, and scatter the fragments in the woods behind the property. Pressured by his father to get his life on track after discovering his alarming state of abandonment and alcoholism, he enrolled at Ohio State University to study business administration, but dropped out after only one semester because he spent entire days drunk. Lionel then forced him to enlist in the United States Army as a medical specialist in January 1979, being assigned to the bases of Baumholder in West Germany. There he acquired a deep technical knowledge of pharmacology and trauma anatomy, an environment from which he was dishonorably discharged in March 1981 because his addiction to alcohol endangered operations and medical discipline. Upon his return to the United States, he settled in the home of his grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, in West Allis, Wisconsin, a deeply religious woman who tried to straighten him out by taking him to the local Baptist church. Dahmer got a job as a production mixer at the Ambrosia Chocolate Company, maintaining a period of apparent social calm that broke on the night of September 15, 1987, when he met Stephen Twomey, 25, at a gay nightclub. After convincing him to go to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee to continue consuming alcohol in room 1412 that Dahmer had rented, the killer spiked his companion's drink with a massive dose of prescription sedatives. Upon waking up the next morning due to complete alcoholic amnesia, Dahmer claimed not to remember the attack, discovering with a mixture of horror and fascination Twomey's corpse on the bed with his chest crushed by blows and evident signs of having suffered manual strangulation. Hiding the body in a canvas travel bag that he bought in a hurry at a nearby store, he boarded a taxi directly to his grandmother's basement to proceed with the surgical dismemberment of the corpse, keeping the head in an airtight container with chemicals. Between 1988 and 1989, Dahmer took the lives of 3 more young men in the grandmother's basement, including James Dockstader, 14, Richard Guerrero, 22, and Anthony Sears, 26, whose heads and genitals he began to preserve in glass jars. During this time he was arrested for sexually abusing a minor at a bus stop, being sentenced to 1 year of probation in a minimum security prison with day release for work. The grandmother's constant complaints about the horrible chemical and biological odors emanating from the lower floor and the strange nocturnal noises of tools forced him to move in May 1990 to apartment 213 of the Oxford Apartments complexes, located at 2513 North 25th Street in Milwaukee. In this small residential space inhabited mostly by racial and low-income minorities, Dahmer unleashed an implacable human carnage that claimed the lives of 12 more victims in 14 months, taking advantage of the fact that the building manager ignored the neighbors' complaints, considering them domestic disputes of the area. His modus operandi consisted of luring young men from bus stations, adult movie theaters, and gay bars by offering them $50 in exchange for accompanying him to his apartment to drink, listen to music, and pose naked for artistic Polaroid photos. Once inside the apartment, he fed them cocktails with sedatives like alprazolam, triazolam, or halcyon to manually strangle them once they were defenseless on the bed. One of his 1990 victims, Ernest Miller, 22, died of a combination of shock and massive blood loss because Dahmer cut his carotid artery with a scalpel while he was unconscious, to later remove the flesh from his skeleton and paint the bones white to simulate a decorative statue. In this stage of absolute delirium, Dahmer began to perform medical experiments of indescribable cruelty in order to create human zombies that remained alive in a state of perpetual submission but with a pulse, emulating a total possession where the young men could never leave him. To achieve this, he fixed the heads of his unconscious victims to the bed frame, drilled into their skulls with a home electric drill, and injected hydrochloric acid or boiling water directly into their frontal lobes through a medical syringe, causing irreversible brain damage and brain death after hours or days of indescribable agony in which the young men wandered around the floor like automatons before collapsing. The apartment became a terrifying forensic warehouse that housed fresh human heads in the freezer, internal organs kept in plastic bags intended for cannibalistic consumption, as Dahmer claimed that eating his victim's flesh made him feel that they were part of his own body, and 3 complete skeletons preserved in bleach inside a large industrial barrel of 105 liters of sulfuric acid that he kept next to his closet. In total, 14 of his 17 victims belonged to ethnic minorities, including 9 young black men. Dahmer always insisted to psychiatrists that race was incidental and that he felt attracted purely to the physical form and a morphological and anthropometric similarity of slender, muscular torsos. One of the most scandalous episodes of police negligence and incompetence occurred on the night of May 27, 1991, when a 14-year-old victim named Konerak Sinthasomphone managed to escape miraculously from the apartment while Dahmer was out buying more beer. The minor, completely naked, bleeding from the anus and the incision in his head, disoriented, and under the severe effects of drugs and the cranial drilling with acid that Dahmer had performed on him hours earlier, was assisted in the street by 3 African-American neighbors, Glenda Cleveland, her daughter Sandra Smith, and her niece, who alerted the authorities immediately. Upon returning to the scene, Dahmer intercepted the police patrols and with astonishing calmness convinced officers John Balcerzak and Joseph Gabrish that the minor was actually his 20-year-old romantic partner and that they had simply had a lover's quarrel due to excessive alcohol. Ignoring the neighbors' desperate protests, who pointed out that the boy was clearly a minor and was seriously injured, and demonstrating a total lack of professional rigor and a latent discriminatory bias, the officers refused to investigate further and escorted the boy back inside Dahmer's apartment, leaving the scene and even making homophobic jokes over the patrol radio without checking identities or inspecting the home. As soon as the officers left, Dahmer murdered the teenager, dismembered his body, photographed the process, and kept his head in the refrigerator. Ironically, years earlier, Dahmer had already murdered this boy's older brother, Konerak Sinthasomphone, in 1988. The definitive end of this reign of terror happened on the night of Monday, July 22, 1991, thanks to the heroic survival act of Tracy Edwards, 32. After being led to the apartment under the deceit of the photographs, Edwards noticed the nauseating odors and the presence of flies and metal handcuffs, managing to keep his composure for more than 4 hours under the constant threat of Dahmer's butcher knife while he forced him to sit on the bed and watch the movie The Exorcist 3. Taking advantage of the captor's distraction when he got up to look for a glass of water, Edwards delivered a strong punch to his face that stunned him and escaped running to the public street by crossing the 3 locks of the door, where he intercepted Milwaukee police officers Robert Roth and Rolf Mueller. Upon entering Dahmer's apartment escorted by Edwards to retrieve the handcuff keys that still hung from his left wrist, Officer Mueller opened one of the drawers of Dahmer's dresser looking for the keys and discovered a collection of dozens of authentic Polaroid photographs showing dismembered human bodies, severed heads in the sink, and macabre poses on the same bed in the room. Upon being cornered and noticing that the policeman showed the photos to his partner, Dahmer tried to lunge at the officers to resist in one last act of desperation but was violently brought to the ground after a brief struggle and arrested definitively. The forensic search of the property moved the world upon the discovery of 7 severed heads, 2 hearts in the refrigerator, various portions of cooked human flesh in containers, complete human hands, a preserved torso, and an arsenal of bone remains ready to be dissolved in the acid barrel. Dahmer confessed in detail to each of his crimes in extensive interrogations of more than 60 hours led by Detective Patrick Kennedy, renouncing any defense strategy based on insanity and assuming total responsibility with a clinical coldness that baffled forensic psychologists, detailing how he consumed parts of his victims' thighs after seasoning them with meat condiments. Although diagnosed by medical experts with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and an unspecified psychotic disorder, he was declared legally sane by the jury at his trial because he demonstrated a perfect ability to distinguish right from wrong when planning and covering up his acts. In February 1992, the court sentenced him to 15 consecutive life sentences in the state of Wisconsin, totaling more than 950 years in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence to which a 16th life sentence was subsequently added in the state of Ohio for the initial murder of Stephen Hicks committed 17 years prior. The police chief fired officers Balcerzak and Gabrish for their negligence in the Sinthasomphone case, although years later they were reinstated with back pay after a union appeal. Jeffrey Dahmer was transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, where after spending the first few months in strict solitary confinement to protect his physical integrity due to the enormous hatred he aroused among the prison population, he requested to be baptized in a prison pool by a minister of the Church of Christ and to be integrated into the prison's community activities, being assigned to cleaning duties in the common areas of the penitentiary center. The danger of loneliness and of this type of emotional and institutional vacuum is a real thing, and while understanding these factors helps to fight and prevent state negligence, it in no way justifies or romanticizes such acts of extreme cruelty. There will always be a percentage of will where other people, living through the same deprivations and family abandonments, decide to build a different, proactive story. On the morning of November 28, 1994, while performing cleaning duties in the prison gym's bathrooms along with 2 other inmates, an African-American prisoner serving a life sentence for murder named Christopher Scarver was left alone with Dahmer and the inmate Jesse Anderson, who was also serving time for a hate crime. Scarver, alleging he had received a divine order after confronting Dahmer with newspaper clippings about his cannibalism crimes that he kept in his uniform pocket, pulled a heavy 20-inch iron bar from a gym weight set and brutally struck Dahmer in the head and face repeatedly, completely shattering his skull and scattering his brain matter on the floor before attacking Anderson in the same mortal manner. Dahmer was found bloody and unconscious on the floor by prison guards who entered after hearing the blows and passed away a few minutes later in the ambulance on the way to the town hospital at the age of 34, violently and definitively closing one of the darkest, most macabre, and terrifying files in the history of global crime. Thank you very much for joining me in this deep, rigorous, and respectful analysis on our channel. If you value investigative journalism that seeks the truth behind great mysteries and want us to keep giving a powerful voice to stories that deserve to be told with justice, do not forget to show your support. Subscribe so you don't miss any of our investigations, leave your like on this video, and share it on your social networks so this story reaches more people. Remember to activate the notification bell to stay up to date with our upcoming premieres. I am John Crime, and we will see each other very soon in the next story of Deep Human Darkness. Stay safe and see you soon. Aquí tienes los recursos listos para que tus videos sobre Jeffrey Dahmer tengan el máximo impacto tanto en español como en inglés. Para el video en español. Título: Jeffrey Dahmer. La verdadera historia del Cannibal de Milwaukee. Description: Nos adentramos en la oscuridad más profunda de la historia criminal con la biografía definitiva de Jeffrey Dahmer. Desde su traumática infancia en Ohio, marcada por el aislamiento y una desconexión emocional absoluta, hasta su sangriento reinado de terror en los Oxford Apartments de Milwaukee. En este análisis riguroso y exhaustivo, reconstruimos paso a paso como un joven aparentemente retraído se transformó en el monstruo de Milwaukee. Analizamos sus métodos, los fallos institucionales que permitieron sus crímenes, el impactante caso de Konerak Sinthasomphone, sus experimentos aberrantes, su juicio y su violento final a manos de Christopher Scarver en prisión. Una historia que explora la naturaleza del mal, el impacto del abandono y la realidad de uno de los asesinos en serie más infames de todos los tiempos. Muchas gracias por acompañarme en este análisis profundo, riguroso y respetuoso. Si valoras el periodismo de investigación que busca la verdad detrás de los grandes misterios y quieres que sigamos dando una voz potente a las historias que merecen ser contadas con justicia, no olvides mostrar tu apoyo. Suscríbete, deja tu me gusta y compartelo para que esta historia llegue más personas. Yo soy John Crime y nos veremos muy pronto en la próxima historia de profunda oscuridad humana.